Hello, Nate.
Hey, Greg. Hey, everybody who's watching this across the ABA's various social media channels. My name is Nate Swick. This is Greg Swick. I'm sorry. My name is Nate Swick. This is Greg. My dad's name is actually Greg. So Greg Swick is
I
a,
know,
is a
I
real
know.
person. Yeah,
I was standing next to him watching an ivory gull a few years
that's
ago, as a
right. A
matter
few
of
years
fact.
ago. That's right. Yeah. Well, welcome to everybody who's watching. My name is Nate. This is Greg. We are here with the American Birding
Wait,
Association.
that's Nate right there.
One of these, we'll get it right one of these days. Um, you think we've done this enough? Welcome. This is our bi-weekly What's This Bird live program that we bring to you across the AVA social media channels, where we basically talk birds and birding for about an hour, and we're excited to do that again. Greg, how are things with you? We'll vamp for a little bit and let people
Yeah.
arrive. But how's your spring coming along? You have any early signs of spring up in the upper Midwest?
Oh yeah, I mean robins are here, red-winged blackbirds are here. You know, our robins are on territory. House sparrows are acting like jerks. Um,
Mm,
but it snowed last night, so we have about a half an inch,
yeah,
quarter inch
just
of snow on the ground. That'll be gone by Sunday. Um, and yeah, it's been the last few weeks has been boring, with the exception of the first state record for Illinois of lesser
Oh
goldfinch,
yeah, that's
which
right.
is
That was just down the road for you.
it's about 20 minutes away from me. And I tried for it on Tuesday. I played hooky and tried for it on Tuesday, and I whiffed. And it's
Oh
of course
no.
been seen. Of course, it's been seen by many people every day since then.
Yeah.
And I just haven't had a chance to get out. I might be able to get out tomorrow afternoon if it sticks around. The cold weather is actually good because the bird
Coming
tends
to a
to
feeding
stay
station,
near the
isn't it?
feeders. It's coming to a feeding
Yeah.
station. It was discovered by the people who band at an education center,
Oh
and
really?
so they have a banding station set up there, and they plucked it out of the net, and the bird has stuck around.
Huh.
So it's
That's really
pretty
interesting.
cool.
Lesser goldfish is one of those species that you think about how common and widespread it is in the western half of the continent, and how really uncommon it is. Relatively speaking to other sort of western vagrants we expect to see in the east. Lesser goldfinch is not one that people encounter all that often, and I have to think this is my theory is that I think a lot of those female type birds and young first year birds, which do tend to make up the majority of vagrants that we do see in the East, just generally speaking, really get overlooked if they tuck in with flocks of American goldfinch. Because I was checking out all the lesser goldfinch records in the East, and so many of those are the flashy males, either the
Mm-hmm.
green-backed or the black-backed males. And obviously, if you see one of those at your feeder, it's going to stand out as something unusual. Whereas a female lesser goldfinch, you could very easily overlook it. And I think we're really fortunate that the banders at this place in Cook County noticed
Yeah.
that it was something different. Because boy, that bird could be missed.
Well, I think when you have them in the hand, it's unless you're an absolute newbie bander, um,
Mm-hmm.
and just they're pretty straightforward to tell apart. But um, talking with one of my old time buddies who's been birding in the Midwest for decades and decades and decades, we talked about lesser goldfinch, maybe 10 years ago or so,
Mm-hmm.
as a possibility as for a first state record. And he just said, and this is something that he studies a lot, and he just said, no, lesser goldfinches don't vagrate. They're like western
Huh.
bluebirds. They just don't.
I
But
guess Western Bluebird
something
doesn't do
something
that.
in the last 10 years, I think if you look at a lot of the records, they're in the last 10 years,
Yeah, yeah. We have
east
a we have
east
a
of the
record
Great
for
Plains.
North Carolina. Some time ago. I think it may have been in the '90s. But yeah, it was one of those really flashy black-backed males that
Right.
pops up at a feeder. It's obvious you've got something weird there, and even someone who is a relatively novice birder and may not have even heard of a lesser goldfinch knows they're normal goldfinches and knows that that's not it.
Yeah.
So I know
So
it's the what's this bird phenomenon, which is I
it
guess is
is.
good a way to segue into what we're doing today.
Yes.
Hello to all of you who are watching. I think we've vamped enough so we can start getting into the
Len
meat
and
of the program.
Len and Lauren are here saying hi. How you guys doing?
Yeah, those are shout outs on Facebook. We have Emily Kate Hunter and Brian Lawrence on YouTube, which is increasingly, growing a little YouTube community here. Hello to
Cool.
all of you there. That's neat to see. Yeah. So what Greg and I do here is we come on every couple weeks or so, and we talk about birds and bird identification. What the ABA manages a What's This Bird Facebook group on Facebook group on Facebook, obviously. But this what it effectively is like this crowdsourced community where people can post photos, videos, audio recordings of birds that they have seen in their yard or elsewhere, and get those birds identified. So we end up having a lot of mystery birds sent to the What's This Bird Facebook group. And what we do here is we'll grab a few of them that we have seen in the last few days that are particularly interesting or particularly illustrative of the season that we are in, which is this sort of late winter, early spring. There's some multi stuff going on. There's some migration going on. There's a lot of birds moving in dribs and drabs, and we haven't hit the big spring migration yet, which is usually an April and May phenomenon across the continent. But there's stuff happening. There's little things going on.
Yep.
And we're going to talk about it. We see it in What's This Bird pretty frequently. We can mark the seasons by the birds that we see on that Facebook group. And so Greg has pulled together some interesting photos, and we're going to do some high wire live bird identification. Don't try this at home, folks. Actually, you can try this at home if you will. We have frequently have people guessing in the comments. You're welcome to do so. And also, in addition to this opportunity to talk about bird identification, if you have any sort of questions, comments about birds, birding, bird feeding, birds in your yard, whatever, throw them in the comments, and we will.
Or like
we'll
Ronan, you just want to say hi.
Hey, Ronan. I remember Ronan from Lexington, Kentucky. I spoke at a bird festival there a few years ago in the pre-pandemic world. He was one of the folks there. Hey, how you doing? Yeah. So we will. Yeah, Greg, shall we jump right into it?
We can jump right in. I'm going to say that the very first bird, all of what you just said does not apply to the very first bird.
Oh man, I did all this setup, and we're totally throwing it by the wayside.
And this comes from Kingsland, Texas, which is sort of up near Austin.
Okay, so Central Texas, obviously a huge state, one of the largest bird lists. So many potential birds in Texas, but boy, this is a flashy one. Look at all that blue and the red,
and the
massive
white
bill. That's a cool looking bird, Greg.
So when you start learning about birds, there are certain birds that are fairly common, that are so distinctive you learn them early on, and some of the ones that come to mind are things like common nighthawk. And kingfishers, which is what this bird is. I mean, it's a perching bird with a gigantic bill and a big bushy crest, and it's bold. And if you were there watching it, it was probably loud. And you learn that there is one kingfisher that we see, and that's the belted kingfisher.
Yeah, kingfisher is one of those families that we in the New World in the Americas get kind of the short shrift on. It's a wide-ranging bird found all around the world, and all the kingfishers in the Old World in Africa and Eurasia and Southeast Africa, or Southeast Asia in particular, Australia, the kookaburras, which are effectively just giant kingfishers. Tons of diversity, lots of really cool looking birds, but in the entire American continent, and by that I mean both North America and South America, we have six species of kingfishers. And for most of us in North America, we have the one.
And exactly. And a lot of people may not realize that in the United States, in the ABA area, the United States and Canada, we actually have 4 species of kingfishers that have been recorded, and 3 of them are regular. And this is not the common one that everybody learns early on.
No, it's got a lot more red on there, and frankly, that bill looks absolutely enormous.
It is enormous.
Belted kingfisher has a large bill, but it's not this large.
Right, and this bird is considerably larger, noticeably larger than a belted kingfisher. It is a monster. And this is the ringed kingfisher, which is a neotropical species that makes its way up to South Texas, and it seems to be increasing its range north like so many birds. I mean,
Yeah,
back in
absolutely.
the day, you had maybe 4 places on the river in South Texas where you could find this bird, and now it's you look at the eBird maps and it's being seen regularly all the way up into the Austin area.
Yeah, and there are records from Oklahoma and
Yep,
Louisiana in recent
yep.
years as well. It's a big bird. It flies well. It can disperse pretty widely. Yeah, ringed kingfisher, really flashy bird. The other kingfisher that Greg was mentioning or alluding to in the ABA area in North America, well, is a green kingfisher, and that is still one that is mostly found in South Texas along the south coast. I did see it in Southeast Arizona as well.
Hmm.
It gets up into there too, and it's a little tiny thing, much smaller than
It's
the belted kingfisher.
it's almost the size of a house sparrow. I mean, it's
Yeah,
not much.
yeah,
If it's bigger than a house sparrow, it's not much. And
yeah.
then the fourth is extremely rare, and that's the
Mhm.
Amazon kingfisher, which is about the same size of a belted kingfisher, but it's green instead of
Green.
blue.
Yeah, it's got a little bit longer bill, if I recall
A little
correctly,
bit,
too. I think
yeah.
there are two records of it in South Texas, both pretty
Yep.
widely spaced
I
apart.
got to see one of
Uh,
them, luckily.
oh yeah, that last one at the Rio Grande Valley Birding Festival a few years ago.
Hmm.
Yeah, but this ring kingfisher, fantastic bird, one of the largest kingfishers in the world. I think
Yeah.
there's laughing kookaburra is also very large, and giant kingfisher, which is an African species, is very big as well. But ring kingfisher is a shockingly big bird. If you ever get a chance to see it down in Texas, I'd encourage you to do so. They're really cool.
Yeah, so let's see. Matt Igleski is vying with Steve Huggins for getting booted out of the group here,
Yeah,
saying
I was
he
gonna
saw the
say, I
lesser.
feel like
Yeah,
that's a shot across the bow there,
it
Greg.
is, but it's normal for him. It's like this constant battle going on.
You
Um,
Chicago Bears.
I know. All right, let's get into the next one here.
Yeah, moving
Um,
on.
yes, this is from New
It's a
Jersey.
nice duck.
And yeah, look at that bird. That's a scooter, isn't it?
Scooter,
Uh,
one of them scooters.
one of them
Electric scooters.
scooters.
Yeah,
Uh,
so we've
what are you
got here's a
seeing here?
water bird, obviously. It's low in the water, so there's not a lot showing over the top. It's very long. It's got kind of a long neck and a relatively smaller head and a kind of a long straight bill. So you can rule out a few things right off the bat, including your scooters, Greg, and just ducks in general. They tend to sit very high on the water because they float very high. So you see a lot of the body over on the top of the water. They look very bulbous and large. And whereas this bird is very low and sleek and slender, there's a couple different groups of birds that would immediately come to mind when I see that, and that would be loons, which are kind of
Hmm.
long and low and have a long bill in the water, and cormorants, which is another frequently seen water bird across most of the continent. And yeah, so those are the two that come to mind for this bird. What are you thinking about that, Greg?
Well, the overall dark plumage,
Mm-hmm.
without any kind of pattern whatsoever,
Yep,
rules out all the loons.
correct. They tend to be
Loons
gray
and
and white. You see a lot of various patches of
loons
white on the
and
sides and in the chin.
exactly. I mean, loons in breeding plumage are spectacular. Loons in winter plumage, as Nate just said, they have some sort of pattern. They're not just dark all over. I jokingly meant Scoter, mentioned Scoter, but this is one of those pictures where if you tossed it into Merlin, I haven't tried it, but I'm just guessing that it might pull up black Scoter because it's a
It
black
might be
bird
an
with
option.
an orange bill face. It's a
Yeah,
possibility.
and this time
And
of year, I don't know where Manahawkin Bay, New Jersey is, but I assume it's coastal New Jersey. And black scooter would be expected in coastal New Jersey this time of year. Probably
mhm.
quite a few of them moving back northward.
But this is not that. I mean, the Scoters don't have long, snaky necks like this, and they have heavier bills.
They look
Even though
like
the,
rubber
the, the,
ducks.
the basic color pattern is kind of similar. But this is a double crested cormorant, and
Mm-hmm.
we can tell that in this picture by the orange lores, the
Yeah.
orange in front of the eye.
Face. Yeah.
If it were a neotropic or great cormorant, it would not show that orange in front of the eye.
Yeah, great cormorant would be the confusion species here. If you're thinking about cormorants, I imagine there would be a few great cormorants up around New Jersey. They would probably be outnumbered. Probably, if it's anything like it is down here it's probably like 10,000 to 1. Up around New Jersey is probably closer to like 500 to 1. The great cormorant becomes more common the further north you get. Up in New England is where you start running into more great cormorants than double-crested cormorants. But great cormorant, just in general, is a much more blockier bird, in addition to having usually a big white patch somewhere on the face. But it's also kind of bigger bodied and especially bigger headed. It looks like someone's took some modeling clay and like put it on top of a great double-crested cormorant and like made it bigger and flatter and blockier. They have a really unique profile if you ever see one sitting on a pylon or some sort of jetty. Much different than the double-crested, which is kind of a slender, snaky sort of bird.
Yes, and it is good to keep your eye open for keep a lookout for neotropic cormorant, because that is a species that is expanding along with black-bellied whistling duck, is expanding in enormous numbers. They're being regularly seen and breeding as far north as central Illinois, and across the east. They're being found all over the place.
Yeah, we got our first record for North Carolina a couple of years ago. It was one of at the very beginning of the pandemic, which was the reason I didn't chase it. I almost regret not doing it now, knowing what we know now about COVID and outdoors. But I did go see it, but it turned up, and I'm sure we'll see one again. In a lot of big reservoirs and along the east, we have like massive wintering flocks of double-crested cormorants. And I think that if someone were willing to sit down and work their way through all the individual birds, you could probably find the smaller, longer-tailed, kind of more slender neotropic cormorant within these big flocks of double-crested cormorants in the winter. I think that's going to be a more common thing, as you say, Greg.
Yeah. I mean, just in the last 5 years, they've gone from being extremely rare, 10 years, extremely rare in most of the Midwest, the lower Midwest, Illinois, Ohio, Missouri, Indiana, to being expected. They're uncommon, but certainly expected. If you go to the places where cormorants live, there's a reasonable chance you'll pick out a neotropic cormorant.
Yeah, we've got some comments in Facebook. Ronan Okara says neotropic cormorant turned up at the same location in Lexington the last few years, displaying to double-crested cormorants. They've been doing that in Florida as well, if I recall correctly. And Chris Ortega, hey Chris, same is true in California. They show up more and more further north. They used to be rare, even in Los Angeles. Yeah, I mean, people are more of
Roxanne Featherly says that Merlin said the bird is a gray-lag goose, because of course it does.
I would check, make sure that your location is on there if you're using Merlin, or make sure that the location is correct there. It does sort of look like a gray-lag goose. It's sort of knowing how Merlin identifies birds, and essentially like kind of blows them up and looks at the patterns and the shape more than anything else. So it's looking at sort of the sun on this bird. So this is a little over exposed photo, just a tad. It's in the bright sun, so that black plumage is going to look more gray, like perhaps you would see on a gray-lag goose.
All right.
Gray-lag goose has orange bill too. Interesting.
It does. Now we have what appears to be a little bird from British Columbia.
Look at those talons, though, Greg. I think this
is. It's a sharp-shinned hawk, is what that is. Look at how skinny the legs are, and how
banded tail.
It does. But that's good you picked that out, because that was one of the things that I was going to point out. So what do you see in here?
I agree with your take that this is a small bird. It's hard to get a sense of size when you're looking at some of these photos, and identifying a bird from photos is different from identifying a bird in life. Partly because you don't get it. Well, I mean, you can be mistaken on size in the field as well.
Absolutely.
But, based on what this little tree looks like with the big knobs and the buds on it, seeming pretty large in comparison to the bird, I agree that this is a small bird. Pretty much all over brown. Looks like it's got some barring on the wings and the tail. I think that's notable.
And the undertail.
It's got kind of exactly. The bill is sort of long, and slender. From what I can
Mm-hmm.
see, it's obscured by that branch, but we get a pretty good sense of it's on the front side of that branch, so we can see a long, slender, slightly hooked, kind of all-purposey bill. With this sort of bird, small bird, long bill that kind of pokes into crevices, definitely seems like a wren to me, especially with all over
Well,
brown and barring all over the body and
right.
the
So
flight feathers.
the barring on the wings and tail, and the tail in particular, um, there's very few birds that have barring on this. Small birds, small passerines in our
Mm,
area that have barring on the tail, and
yeah,
almost all of them are wrens. Um,
yeah,
Cassin sparrow is the only sparrow that comes to mind.
yeah. Clearly not a Cassin sparrow
I
with
can't
that long thin bill.
exactly. So we can narrow this down to wrens, and in British Columbia, we've got, I believe, well, I know
Three.
we have Pacific wren, we have Buick's wren.
Is
Um,
Buick's does Buick's get that far north?
I think it does, but I'm not certain off the top of my head.
Pull up my
Um, and house
real
wren.
quick. Yep. Um, Susan Nelson asks some kind of a flycatcher. That's an interesting question based on how it is perched there. It does sort of look flycatchery with its posture here. But there are a few things that don't say flycatcher to me. First off, that bill looks a bit too long and skinny. Flycatchers,
Mm-hmm.
they have a long bill, but it's broad, and you'd be able to kind of see based on the angle that we're looking at how broad that bill is on a flycatcher. And also, just the way that flycatchers look to me, they seem awfully big-headed, right? Compared to the size of their body. We're talking about proportion here. The head looks awfully large, and the body can look very slender. And this one looks a little bit different. It's got kind of a large, chunky, round body and a smaller head, which says wren to me, even though it doesn't have that kind of classic cocked tail that wrens tend to show.
Right.
But that's a good point. It does sort of look like a flycatcher with this posture.
Well, and the things that we can see most clearly, the barring on the undertail coverts and the tail. There's no flycatcher in our area that has barring on the
Has a
tail
bar
like
tail.
that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And no barring on the wings as well. Chris Ortega says Buick's is common in southern BC. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of thought they
pulled up
were.
yeah, southern BC and Vancouver Island. And I don't know exactly where Vernon is, but
It's
since
it's
that's
been
where
a few
most
years
people
since.
are in BC, I imagine
Yeah.
that's where this photo was taken.
Yeah, it's been a few years since I've been to that part of the world.
Yeah, so just the lack of any marking on the face looks very plain, sort of rules out Buick's for me.
And the
Buick's
tail
has
the
a
tail
tail is
uh,
short.
the tail is relatively short.
Yeah.
Buick's wren has a very long, expressive tail
Yes.
with pale
Yes. Like
tips on the outer tail
flicking
feathers. And so I think we're down to Pacific wren, which is the western species that's related to the more widely known winter wren. Split, I don't know, what, about 10 years ago, 8 years ago,
I
something
think
like that.
that's about right.
Um, and it's Pacific wren is a very small, dark bird. It's
Very
dark
dark.
underneath. It's got black and white barring on the flanks. It's got a shorter bill. It's got a tiny tail, tiny tail. So by process of elimination, we get to house wren on this bird.
Yeah, yeah, and that was my first impulse as well. It's nice to kind of talk through that Pacific wren identification because it does, Pacific wren and house wren can look sort of superficially similar, but as you say, Greg, the tail on a Pacific wren is going to be real tiny and they do frequently have that kind of ticked up tail just because it is so tiny.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever seen a winter or Pacific wren with its sitting with its tail down like this. I mean, I'm sure they do, but I've just never.
I don't know if
one.
I've ever seen a winter or Pacific wren sitting out in the open like this.
Exactly.
Like they are in the densest brambly little area, hopping along, usually no more than about 3 feet off the ground, giving their little call. Yeah.
I don't know this for a fact, but the Eurasian version of that same group, winter, Pacific, and the Eurasian wren, is where they get their genus name Troglodytes, which means cave dweller.
Yeah,
and
troglodyte. Yep.
exactly. And the the winter and Pacific wrens, when you find them in deep woods and often along little creeks where they go under the cut banks.
Yep.
And they just really like it in those dark places.
Yeah, definitely. Bramble, tangles, anything like that. There's a reason why they're called troglodytes. The original troglodytes. For those birding etymologists out there. Yeah. So house wren. Chris Ortega notes Vernon is pretty far north for Buick, so it must be a little bit further up the coast. Yeah. That sounds right. I mean, this is pretty clearly a house wren.
Moving along.
Oh okay, my goodness,
so
which bird are we identifying, Greg?
Well, exactly. We get a good number of these where people photograph a bird of prey carrying another bird, and they know what the bird of prey is, but they're curious to know what the prey is. What are they catching? What have they caught? What are they eating? We had some pretty gory ones. We have a pretty good record of figuring out what the prey species are.
I think so. So just to get the obvious out of the way, the predator bird here is a bald eagle. This is an adult bald eagle, hard bird to misidentify anything for as an adult, with a white head and white tail and big, dark, broad wings. The bird that it has in its talons. So bald eagles are pretty famously known to I mean, they're primarily fish eaters, but where there are fish, there are also fish eating birds, and so they will very readily take things like coots and ducks, and in this case, Newport, Oregon, on the coast of Oregon. All those things are sort of coots probably not in play, but ducks and also I would expect on the West Coast to see alcids. Alcids would be in prey too, and I think a bald eagle would happily take those as well. You see a coot on the West Coast?
Yeah.
I don't see coots on the ocean very often.
No, they wouldn't be on the ocean, but I mean, Newport has that whole area has inland marshes and stuff.
Yeah.
But when I look at this bird now, I spent a week in that area a few years ago and photographing birds on the coast, and I spent some time with the prey bird. And one thing when I saw this picture that stuck out to me is that the wing shape is unique.
For sure.
We'll back up just a little bit what we can see here. It's white underneath. It has black and white wings underneath. Mm-hmm. It's got black feet. It's got a short tail. Yes, black webbed feet, a short tail. And it's a fairly sizable bird because a bald eagle is a big bird.
The body is quite large. Yeah,
this is a fairly big-bodied bird. It's going to be a good dinner for that.
The wings are relatively small for such a large-bodied bird.
Small but long, and they're kind of this weird kind of long. And this, if you've spent any amount of time watching them, you know that wing shape is an alcid. Those are the auks.
Yep.
And the puffins and the murres and the guillemots, they all have that same kind of strangely shaped wing.
So their wings are primarily for moving through the water. So alcids use their wings to propel their bodies when they're flying underneath the water. If you've ever been to like a zoo where they have alcids, here in North Carolina, the North Carolina Zoo has a little Arctic birds exhibit where they have puffins and murres and guillemots in a little tank that you can see them like swimming underneath water, and it's really cool because they get there and they paddle they're like penguins. Penguins famously use their wings to move underwater. Alcids are the same way, except they can also use their wings to fly, though that flight is sort of inefficient. They buzz their wings like a little bumblebee. They have these super fast little wing beats when you see them flying over the water, but mostly they use those wings to fly, to propel themselves when they're underneath the water chasing fish.
Yeah, and I'm just double checking something here.
I have an idea. I have a thought. Well, I have it narrowed down to two.
Well, I have it narrowed down to. I just have to double check something here because my memory is. Let's see here. What am I looking for?
Jim Fiermeyer in YouTube suggests that with the legs so far near the back suggest a diving duck. A diving bird for sure. I think I would expect a duck to have different shaped wings. The wings would be much broader. on a duck, and also probably a little bit of a longer tail. But yeah, you're definitely
Yeah.
on the right.
Okay, so
track.
I just double checked that, and the combination of the white line, white wing linings, and the dark flight feathers, the white belly, and the black feet, makes this a common murre, which is
Okay.
very common along the coast in that area.
I was going to say myrrh was my guess, and I didn't know the status and distribution of common versus thick-billed myrrh in Newport.
Yeah, they're not
Oregon,
found that far south.
That's what I was just noticing. Thick-billed myrrh would be Alaska, not really.
Yeah,
south
exactly.
Of Alaska.
The
Rhonda
birds,
Featherly asked Merlet, and yeah, I mean, there's a ton of different alcid possibilities on the West Coast. A lot of alcids there this time of year. It does not look. It looks too big to be a merlet.
Too
I mean,
big.
merlets are little tiny things. I think we underestimate how tiny they actually are. Whereas a myrrh is like a duck, roughly a duck-sized bird. Maybe a little bit smaller, but yeah. So I would expect this to be the right size for a myrrh.
The larger alcids, like the guillemots and puffins, have red or orange legs, and don't have the white wing lining.
Yeah. Guillemot has bright red, bright red
feet.
Yeah.
So
so that's
this
cool.
is a common myrrh and a bald eagle.
Yeah. So we have a question from Elise May. Is it true the bald eagle's white head does not appear until about 6 years old? Yeah, that's correct. Is it 6 or is it 7?
Like that.
I've heard 7. They usually have some whitish head you know, after 5th year, but it's not like that clean white until they get to be 6 or 7 years old. You know, the young birds are famously kind of chocolate brown all over with mottled underwings, and then they sort of gradually get more and more like the kind of classic adult birds that we all think of when we think of bald eagles. It's like a continuum line, and you just kind of little by little they're changing into that over the years.
So before we move on, Robert Crawford had a question. He asked about ABA abundance codes, which he says are based on each species that occur in the ABA area. Are abundance codes available for individual states or provinces? Not really.
Not unless I know I've heard of some states, and I can't think of them off the top of my head, that have done something like that for their state. But it's not a regular thing. It requires the work by the relevant body or just a keen birder, honestly.
Yeah, I mean there are some. We actually have a scheme that we use for filtering unusual species in Birding News, which is our listserv aggregator that was put together by Matt Smith, who runs Fantasy Birding, and it's pretty good. But there's no one generally accepted. It's really good actually, but there's no one generally accepted abundance code that is uniform across all of the states. That means the same thing in each state.
Right, exactly. And if people are curious, the ABA abundance codes are 1 through 5 numbers that we assign to the birds on the American Birding Association checklist that basically tells you how common a bird is or how many records there are. Just going through them real quickly. Code 1 is a commonly occurring bird that's found across most of the continent, or can be easily found in large chunks of the continent. 2 would be a breeding bird in the ABA area that is local. So I think for a very long time, ringed kingfisher, to throw back to earlier, was a code 2 species because it was typically only found. It was a common breeding bird, but was typically only found in one small part. But that's an example of a code 2 species. A lot of those South Texas specialties are code 2. Code 3 is a vagrant, a bird that does not breed in the ABA area, but is a regularly occurring rare bird. What's a good example of a code 3, Greg? I'm thinking like tufted duck.
But I think code 3 also includes, and I'll have to look at the
broad.
exact.
It's a broad one.
It's a broad one. I believe that it also does include some extremely local breeding species. I think
maybe like Hawaii,
or spectacled eider. I believe is code 3, but they've also all been shifted in the last checklist.
Right. And then 4 and 5 are vagrants. 4 is, 5 is very rare. 4 is less rare. And it's there's somewhat arbitrary distinction between some of those things, but that's just if you're curious about what it means, that's what it means.
Yeah, and
we hear someone say a code 2 bird or a code 3 bird or whatever.
If you go to aba.org/checklist, those codes are explained with example species.
Yeah, Heidi McCullough says Eurasian tree sparrow. I think that's a 2.
Yeah, I think
it's a breeding bird in the ABA area, but it's highly localized between Quad Cities and St. Louis on the Mississippi River.
So, and Ronan says that they have coding in Kentucky that they on their checklist. So
that may have been one that I was thinking of.
Most Bat Falcon is 5 because it's the first record. So that's a code 5.
Officially, it's not. Officially, it's not even on the checklist yet, and won't
that's
be
true. But it will be
this year. But it will be. It will be, and it will be a 5 because there's one record.
Yeah.
Even though the bird is like sticking around for months, making a mockery of our code system.
Well, it's still only one.
Yeah.
If it showed up with 4 of its friends, then it would make a mockery of the code system.
And maybe so. No, it's pink-footed goose that's currently making a mockery of the code system as a 4.
This is true.
It really should be a 3.
This is true.
Madagletsky says rose-throated Beckard or Beckard, however you like to pronounce it, is code 3. And there are some specific areas you can get them. I think that used to be a 2 back when it bred regularly in Arizona, but it hasn't for years. Anyway,
on we go.
Anyway.
We're back in Vernon, British Columbia.
Oh man, what's with Vernon? A lot of hot
well,
bird records coming out of Vernon. Man.
I was looking at the pictures and not paying attention too much to where they were coming from. But I like this. I like this one because
the bill is foreshortened. It's hard to get a real sense of size and shape there.
We can see a lot on the bird, but we can't see as much maybe as we'd like. So what we do see is that if this is a standard size fence post, this is a small bird. So it's like to use a common size reference. It is sparrow sized. It's brown and kind of streaky mottled all over. We can see some streaks on the flank that we see. The bill is foreshortened, and it's kind of, it's hard to see in the photo exactly what's going on, but it looks it looks kind of thick, like you would expect a seed-eating bird like a sparrow or a grosbeak or something like that. But the things we can see best here are parts of the face pattern and the wing. So what are you taking away there?
Yeah, so I'm really drawn to that face pattern for sure. It's got a really strong malar stripe, which is the line that kind of goes down diagonal from the bill, like a mustache, sometimes called. And it's got a bright white eyebrow and white median stripe. I'm not exactly sure how important that is. I know there's a handful of sparrows that have that. And I just, generally speaking, the shape of the body, although it is kind of puffed up and it's holding its wing very oddly, it looks like it was taking a dust bath or something, and it's kind of ruffled up. The tail looks really short to me too.
The tail is short. So, I think that we can narrow this down to sparrows.
Yeah, definitely.
And the face pattern is what stands out to me. And up in that part of British Columbia, there aren't as many sparrows as there are further south. And song sparrow is one example. This is not a song sparrow for a bunch of reasons. One,
it doesn't look right for song sparrow.
That the body shape and everything is wrong. The tail is too short.
The song sparrow would have a longer tail for sure.
Yeah, and song sparrows are darker and they have all these blurry streaks on them,
especially in British Columbia.
Yes, and this bird has some really nice kind of crisp looking patterns on it.
Yep.
looking at that face pattern, if you're flipping through your book, I wouldn't be shocked if you might have landed on lark-sparrow and been like, "Whoa, look at that!"
Yeah.
Because this bird has pattern somewhat similar to that.
Yeah.
Another bird up there would be vesper sparrow, and
It does almost look like it has a little bit of an eye ring.
a little bit.
You can see a little bit below, but I don't think it's strong enough for vesper sparrow.
No, and the supercilium, the eyebrow stripe is too bold for a vesper sparrow. Vesper sparrow has a very plain face overall, almost they're very different from the song sparrow looking sparrows. So that lands us on Savannah sparrow, and that's
it's a good
catch-all.
It's a good catch-all. I don't really like identifying birds based on field marks you can't see versus field marks you can see.
Well,
but Savannah sparrow is frequently one of those field birds that you kind of reach by process of elimination a lot of times. There's a lot of things going for Savannah sparrow. Habitat looks good for Savannah sparrow on a fence post with no tangles or brambles around it. Tail looks a little bit short. The face pattern definitely checks out. Savannah sparrow was my first impulse on this bird, and far enough north that there aren't a ton of other sparrow options to go for. Savannah is one of our most wide-ranging sparrow found across the entire continent.
Exactly.
So you can expect to see it just about anywhere.
Other things to notice here is how crisp the streaking is on the flank. A song sparrow would have blurrier streaks. Savannah sparrow, the field guides tell you to look for yellow in the eyebrow, the in front of the eye where
you
the
might be able to see
starts.
A little bit of that here.
I
can't
don't
tell whether
do.
that's my wanting to see it as opposed
I think
to it
is.
actually being there.
I don't see any yellow here, and I picked this picture for that reason, is that this is a Savannah sparrow, and oftentimes they don't show yellow where the field guide says they should. But what we do see is that the malar, that mustache stripe that Nate pointed out earlier, and the supercilium, and that's the line over the eye, are basically the same color and tone, and they frame the face. And that is a good mark for Savannah sparrow. In song sparrow and Lincoln sparrow, which is another species that you find up there, the malar and the supercilium are different colors. The malar is buffy and the supercilium is kind of grayish. So when you see a sparrow that the malar and the supercilium are basically the same color and tone, it's a Savannah sparrow.
I also love status and distribution when I'm talking about Savannah sparrow, especially specific habitat requirements. I almost always see Savannah sparrows in very open place. They call them Savannah sparrows for a reason, right? Whereas song sparrows and Lincoln sparrows and other birds that you might expect to see in this area would probably prefer a different microhabitat, much more brushy, a lot of low tangles and stuff that they can hide in, whereas Savannah sparrow will be like right out in the open in a fallow farm field or some sort of open area where there's nothing else growing around but grasses.
Yep. All right, pressing on.
We're down to the last 20 minutes. We'll just remind you, if you have any questions about birds or birding, please let them in the comments, and we will get to them as we go.
Right now we are in Homewood, Illinois, and this is now the time of blackbirds. March is when the blackbirds start moving back into if you live in the South, you've had blackbirds all winter long. If you're in places further north, the blackbirds are starting to move back up north, and you'll see them at your feeders, and you'll see them in your local parks. And so here we have a blackbird that's got a bunch of white speckling all over it and a big yellow bill.
I think that's the most notable thing about this bird. And long wings and a relatively short tail.
That was the other thing, is the long wings and short tail. Is when you're looking through a flock of blackbirds in the treetops, and you look at the sometimes it's hard to see the bills. It's especially, if they're facing away from you, but note the relative length of the wings and the tail. And by doing that, you can eliminate the European starlings, which is what this is.
Yeah. Yeah, most of our native blackbirds are going to have a very long tail, especially, longest is going to be your grackle, but even things like rusty, brewer's blackbird, red-winged blackbird, they have a pretty long tail. They're all sort of shaped very similar, as you would expect of all those birds, and they're all in the same family, Icteridae, whereas the starling is in a completely different family, Sternidae, largely old world family of all kind of chunky, pot-bellied, round-bodied birds with short tails, mostly short tails. There are some long-tailed
there's a few spectacularly long-tailed starlings, but most of them are basically this shape.
This shape with different features on this shape. But the sort of black speckling, and of course the long bill that is yellow, whereas all of our other blackbirds are going to have a black bill that's a little bit shorter, a little more conical, but never as long as this one, never as long and straight as this one.
Mm-hmm. Okay, here's a cute little bugger. This comes from Concord, California.
Yeah. Round-bodied, large head, cute face, smallish.
It's on the edge of a bird bath, so we can tell that it's
long
not really
legs.
Yeah.
All brown all over, maybe a little bit of pattern on the front side of that. This is a thrush. This is one of the Catharus thrushes.
Thin bill. Well, and one of the
spotted thrushes.
Yep. And the first thing you notice here is that this bird's got a bright rufous tail.
Yeah, I was gonna leave that one, but the tail is pretty bright there. And I don't know what it is about this photo. Sometimes you can imply a lot of movement in these photos, but I can almost imagine this bird kind of dropping its wings and kind of raising and lowering that tail very slowly as it's sitting there on the edge of the bird bath. I can just see it doing it. Looks like it's in mid-raise right there. There's really only one Catharus in North America that has a bright red tail and kind of a brown body like that, and that's Hermit thrush.
Yep. And in the east, the other small bird this size with a bright rufous tail is fox sparrow, but out west in California they're darker and they don't have all that rufous on them. So really in California, the only bird that looks even vaguely like this is a hermit thrush.
Yeah, there are some Catharus thrushes that look a little different than they do out here. There's an eastern and western Swainson's thrush that's actually, always throws me off whenever I see one of the western Swainson's thrushes, because they look sort of Veery-esque almost. They're almost as bright as a Veery. But, when that foxy red is limited strictly to the tail and the rump, that's a pretty good indication that what you're looking at is a hermit thrush, no matter where you are. And they should be moving right now. And if you're lucky, you go outside right now, they'll usually start singing. It's a winter only bird where I live in the southeast, but usually in March and late March, right before they start heading out, you can start hearing them sing a little bit, and it's always kind of really neat to hear. They have a really fantastic song.
They do, and this image also sort of captures what you see in life when you're watching this species. All thrushes have a tendency, but especially hermit thrushes have this tendency to sort of clap their wings at their sides as they move around.
Yeah.
And while doing that, hermit thrush raises it flips up its tail and then slowly drops it, and it's really pretty distinctive.
Yeah, they definitely do that more than other birds. Jesse Kohler says this photo could look like an ovenbird. It could a little bit. Ovenbird is the most thrush-like of the warblers, but a few things would stand in the way of ovenbird based on what we can see right here. Ovenbird tends to be more kind of olivey tan in color and not this kind of grayish brown. And it wouldn't have a red tail for sure. And ovenbird, actually, with this angle, you'd be able to see it's got a median stripe right across the top of its tail, top of its head, and you'd be able to see that with this. I don't know if I've ever had an ovenbird give me this good a look though either.
And the back is green. Overall, it's an olive green. It's not sort of a dunnish brown. Amy Bollinger asks, how do you keep starlings away from your suet cake? The simple answer is you don't. They are little winged gangsters.
Yeah, you take your suet down for a week, and you
They'll go find something else.
Hopefully, they'll find something else. Yeah, that's really
okay. Moving on here. This is kind of an interesting picture. This is immediately identifiable if you're familiar with the species and the species that it might be confused with, but it's an unusual pose maybe, and it's blocked by branches and the lighting stinks.
For sure. Yeah, we get these sort of photos all the time. The bad lighting, blocked by branches sort of photos. I think there's a difference between birds that people post that need to be identified that are like really nice photos, and they have trouble because there's a number of confusion species. And there are photos that we get sometimes where the birds are in a weird angle or behind a bunch or obscured and behind a bunch of branches or whatever, and they need to be identified that way. Right. Although this bird does have a confusion species in addition to being obscured. Anyway, exactly. So we're looking at a bird that has a large head, long body, black and white, black wings, big white spot on the back of its back. That kind of very straight, symmetrical, chisel-shaped bill. This is a woodpecker.
Yep, the bill shape is...
The bill shape is woodpecker. Yep.
Yes.
There's no other bird that'll have anything like that, like the end of a chisel for good reason.
Mm-hmm.
As far as black and white woodpeckers in North America, we've got two that have a bright white back like that, and that is downy woodpecker and hairy woodpecker. And they're not closely related.
No, they're not.
Despite the fact that
with that big honking bill, that's a hairy woodpecker.
That's a hairy woodpecker. Yeah, the people sometimes look at downy woodpecker and hairy woodpecker as a confusion species, and what we've always said is that if you can't tell, it's a downy, because once you see a hairy, it's a hairy woodpecker, because it's, in addition to having that long straight woodpecker bill, downy is a very tiny little bill. Harry's is more proportionate, more like a medium-sized woodpecker, like a red-headed or a red-bellied woodpecker.
Mm-hmm.
Their body size is similar to a red-bellied woodpecker, which is something that you see when you see them pretty close together. Sapsucker, yellow red-bellied woodpecker, that sort of body size, whereas a downy woodpecker is just a little tiny thing.
Yep.
Hairy woodpecker is a normal-sized woodpecker, not one that's been stuck in the dryer.
With a toothpick bill.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna press on here to our
last. This is our last one. It's the last one because we only got 10 minutes left. Do we want to take Chris Ortega's question about?
Well, I didn't see it.
Yeah, might as well. He asks about. We have any idea when the ABA will get a new non-interim president? We don't know. We're still in that process. If you know anybody, please have them apply. We've sent out. We have a search firm looking for a new president, but good candidates can come from anywhere. So if you know somebody who might be interested, please encourage them to apply. We don't really know. Hopefully by this summer, I think we'll have someone in place is the plan. Mm-hmm. But it's hard to say. Who knows how those things go. And further, he asks, do you think it's possible the ABA could move toward doing any of the name changes? Because and I lost the email because I lost the message because something else popped up and anyway. I lost
name
it.
Changes.
Took it away. Name changes because AOS may or may not be doing anything on that. No, the answer to that is no. We take our cue from the American Ornithological Society's North American Checklist Committee, and whatever they decide to do is what we will do, unless someone like eBird were to take hold, and I don't necessarily think that they are going to either. So right. That's sort of the answer to that. A lot of us support the yes. Name change effort, but as an organization, we are about bird community and communication, and the best way to do that is to use currently the official names, even if we don't necessarily agree with those names. So that's I think that's where we are on that. But thanks, that's a good question and a thoughtful question.
So in the interest of time here,
I'm
going to cut to the chase on this one. and just say this is a gull or a tern. And we can, with all of the black patterning on the bill and the tail, and the rather small dark bill, we can eliminate the terns for. Well, we can eliminate the terns.
Well, terns also usually have a swallow tail. Even the
Right.
large terns like Caspian tern and royal tern have a little bit of a
Right.
swallow tail, even if it's not as deep as like the classic forked tail of like a common tern or a Forster's tern or something like that. So this is a very tern-like gull.
It is. This is one of the smaller gulls.
One of the black-headed ones.
And yes, exactly. And those in our area include the Bonaparte's gull, little gull, and increasingly in the northeast, black-headed gull.
Southeast too.
And southeast, yeah. And in this plumage, because this is not an adult, black-legged kittiwake. And if you look at your guide and you look at this picture, you might be pulled to black-legged kittiwake in first winter plumage, because it's got that big dark collar on the back of the neck, and kind of a dark cap. But there's a few things wrong for kittiwake.
And wings look a little busy.
The wings are a little busy. It's got that white in the primaries. And it's got the bill is just too thin for a kittiwake. Kittiwake has a thicker, heavier bill that is it's shaped more like what you would think of a normal gull versus a small gull. It's got more of a gonadial angle, and so now we are down to three. So let's compare them and see what we got here. I'm going to go all Richard Crosley on you.
Oh, look at that mess of gulls.
Yeah. So here we have the original bird in the center, and we have a little gull in the same plumage on the right. So let's compare those two for a moment. You'll notice the little gull
Greg, I think you did a nice job trying to get the size comparison pretty good on little gull versus this bird as well, because little gull really is a little gull. It is a little tiny bird, and that, as you say, the pattern on the. Well, go ahead. I won't jump the gun for you.
No. Go right ahead, man.
The pattern on the wing on little gull is the first thing that you're going to see for the most part on these young birds. I mean, it's just bold and big, and our bird in question does not have that.
Yes, and you'll also notice that the wingtips are much darker. The secondary coverts are much brighter by comparison. So as you said, the overall the gestalt is a much more boldly patterned bird, and as you also said, it's smaller. And it's when you get little gull in with other small gulls, they are very noticeably the smallest.
Yeah, and they flap faster, and they kind of glide less. All that is because they're smaller.
Yes. One other little minor point while we've got little gull up there, and we're talking about it, is you'll notice that the wrist, sort of the forward edge of the wing where it bends, Bonaparte's gull in this plumage has these little white headlights, and you'll see that right at the bend of the wing.
Oh wait, we've agreed that the bird in question is Bonaparte's gull.
Oh God, I let that slip. Yes, it is a Bonaparte's gull.
That's okay. It is. It is a Bonaparte's gull.
It is a Bonaparte's gull. Bonaparte's gull has these little white headlights, and little gull does not. So when they're swirling around, that's something you can notice. Now on the left, we have another Bonaparte's gull on the bottom, and a black-headed gull, which is a Eurasian species that's been showing up frequently on the East Coast and inland areas like Ohio and New York. And the first thing you'll notice is the bill. Black-headed gull has a heavier bill. It's got a reddish or orangish base. It has darker primaries. If you look at the inner primary, so the 4 or 5 feathers where the wing bends on the trailing edge.
Flight feathers, yeah.
Yeah, the main flight feathers, but the trailing edge, if you look at that and compare the two, Bonaparte's gull has this bold black stripe that goes all the way from the body all the way out to the wingtip, whereas black-headed gull is much muddier, especially on the inner primaries. And but the thing that really stands out when they're flying around is the underside of the wingtip, the primaries. If you look at the distant wing there, the black-headed gull has black or very dark gray undersides, and the Bonaparte's is bright white.
Yep. So keep an eye out for both little gull and Bonaparte's gull, or black-headed gull among your Bonaparte's gulls. For me, black-headed gull doesn't always like to hang out with Bonaparte's gulls, whereas little gull is often in flocks of Bonaparte's gulls. At least this is speaking of maybe this is a southeast thing. Little gull will be seen in those big flocks of Bonaparte's gulls that are just flying around offshore. But black-headed gull likes to hang out with like laughing gulls and ring-billed gulls more than Bonaparte's gulls. At least just generally speaking down here. I don't know if that's true where you are. You don't have laughing gulls for starters, but
the one black-headed gull I've seen in the ABA area was hanging out with ring-billed gulls.
Yeah,
but there weren't a lot of Bonaparte's gulls.
I mean, it's bigger than a Bonaparte's. Yeah.
It is. These birds are all first winter, so gulls. I think at least May
hatched
asks about
last summer.
Right, gulls go through they go through plumage cycles where some gulls take up to 3 years or 4 years even to attain true adult plumage. In the case of these smaller gulls, they have this plumage for about a year and then transition into the adult plumage, which is much more bright with the black heads like you see in the field guides.
Yeah,
Madagascar,
especially the wing pattern is much more stronger. The adult Bonaparte's gulls have that kind of classic wing pattern where they've got that it's like that big triangle, white triangle on the front leading edge of their wing. That's very distinctive of Bonaparte's gulls. Whereas little gull adults have a more like gull wing that's like gray all the way and little black on the tip, so that's another.
And it's
these are younger
rounder
birds.
too, and when you see them, they have an almost moth-like flight compared to other gulls.
Yeah,
little gulls do. Madagascar points out a field mark that I forgot to mention, and that is the white trailing edge to the little gull, which is on the right, that the Bonaparte's gull does not have.
Yeah, correct. Chris Ortega says the only black-headed gull he's seen was with a flock of 3,000 bonnies. Well, he's on the west coast. You guys don't have ring-billed gulls over there, not very often, so they have to hang out with bonnies, right?
I guess
bonnies, however you want to pronounce it. Yeah, and this is one of those things where if I were this is identifying birds from photos is very different than identifying birds in life. If you were in life, you would see that young Bonaparte's gull, and it would probably be with a big flock of adult Bonaparte's gulls, which would make the identification a little bit easier. At least you can kind of use that as a clue for what you're identifying. So,
and when you see any of these,
you do get all the gulls. California gets
when you see Bonaparte's gulls in this plumage, as you said, you often see them together in groups, in flocks. And so when there is something unusual like a black-headed or a little gull, they tend to stand out. Just because they are noticeably different.
That's the secret of birding.
I didn't mention
finding unusual birds.
Len asked why I didn't mention
you get a big
Sabin's
flock of regular
gull.
birds and find the weird things. Sabin's gull. I don't know. Do you see Sabin's gull from? Well, I guess I've seen Sabin's gull at a lake in my home county, but most Sabin's gulls I hear about are offshore. That's a real pelagic gull.
But they're also
within sight of land all that often.
Also, the wing pattern is utterly unique and not at all like Bonaparte's black-headed or little.
Correct. Well, we are past 2:00, and 4 minutes past 2:00.
4 minutes.
I want to thank all of you for joining us. This was a really fun one. A lot of great comments and conversation in the notes. If you enjoy what we do here, please consider supporting it by joining the American Birding Association. Greg is pointing to the address here, aba.org/join. Not only do you help us keep doing stuff like this, because there is a small cost that goes into production of this sort of thing, and also Greg and my time. But also, you get a lot of cool stuff when you join the ABA. You get our great magazines, you get discounts to partners like Beauty Books and a few others. You get opportunities to travel with us. There's a lot of really cool stuff going on at the ABA. And if you'd like to join, please. I always check the wrong one because it's.
I'll do it for you. I'll do it for you. There it is.
aba.org/join. And also, if you enjoy, we have a lot of other cool free things that go on. If you like talking about birds, please check out the American Birding Podcast that I host that comes out every Thursdays. And you can find that wherever podcasts are found.
Best natural history podcast out there. And we've got some, this is a particular, it's always a good time to join the ABA. But this is a particularly good time because we've got some cool things coming down the near pipeline here that you'll want to be jumping in on early. I can't say much about them right now, but if you're a member, if you're already a member, there's some new stuff coming your way, and if you're not, now's a good time to join.
No, absolutely. So I will say goodbye to everybody who's watching, and goodbye to you, Greg. I will see you on the Slack channel, and as we do our thing, and we'll be back in a couple weeks, and we'll see you then.